I'm Jessica, 32 years old, and I thought I had finally found my forever home. After years of scrimping and saving every penny from my teaching salary, my husband David and I bought the most beautiful colonial house with a white picket fence and wraparound porch. But little did I know that my mother-in-law Patricia had other plans for our dream home. Plans that would turn my life into an absolute nightmare and test everything I believed about family loyalty and standing up for yourself. Before I dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about family dynamics. Trust me, you're going to want to buckle up for this one, because what happened next changed my entire perspective on marriage boundaries and fighting for what's rightfully yours. David and I had been together for 3 beautiful years when we started seriously house hunting. We were both high school teachers, me teaching English literature, and him teaching math, and we'd been saving every single dollar we could spare. While our friends were going out to fancy restaurants and taking weekend trips, we were eating homemade meals and having movie nights at home, all because we shared this dream of owning our own place. The house hunting process was grueling. Month after month, we'd spend our weekends driving around different neighborhoods, looking at houses that were either way out of our price range or needed so much work we'd basically be buying a money pit. I remember one particularly disappointing Saturday when we'd looked at 7 houses and every single one had some major deal breaker. David was getting frustrated, and I was starting to worry we'd never find anything within our budget. But then our realtor called us about this house. The moment I walked through that front door, I knew it was the one. It was a charming 2-story colonial, with original hardwood floors that gleamed in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the large windows. The kitchen had been recently updated with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, and there was this cozy breakfast nook that overlooked the backyard. Speaking of the backyard, it was absolutely perfect with a mature oak tree that provided beautiful shade and enough space for the garden I'd always dreamed of having. The wraparound porch was what really sold me, though. I could already picture myself sitting there on Sunday mornings with my coffee reading a good book while David worked in the yard. The whole place just felt like home in a way that none of the other houses had. Of course, Patricia had opinions about our choice. David's mother was a retired bank manager who'd spent 30 years scrutinizing people's financial decisions, and she wasn't shy about sharing her expertise with us. During our second walkthrough, when we brought her to get her opinion, she kept making these subtle comments disguised as helpful suggestions. "Are you sure you want to take on this much house payment?" she'd ask while running her finger along a windowsill. "And this neighborhood, well, I suppose it's acceptable, though I noticed the houses across the street could use some work." I tried to include her in our decorating discussions, thinking it might help her warm up to the idea. I showed her paint samples and asked her opinion about furniture arrangements. She'd nod politely and make non-committal sounds, but I could tell she wasn't thrilled about our choice. David, caught between his excitement about the house and his mother's lukewarm reception, kept trying to reassure both of us. "Mom just wants to make sure we're making a smart financial decision," he'd tell me. "She'll love it once we move in and make it our own." The closing process felt like it took forever, but finally on a bright Tuesday morning in March we got the keys. I actually cried when the realtor handed them to me. All those years of sacrifice and saving had led to this moment. We owned a house. We had a home. Our first month in the house was pure bliss. We spent our evenings and weekends painting the rooms in colors that made us happy. The master bedroom became a soft sage green, and I painted the spare bedroom a cheerful yellow, because I hoped it might become a nursery someday. We hosted small dinner parties for our teacher friends, and I loved showing off our beautiful dining room with its original built-in china cabinet. It was during this honeymoon period that Patricia started mentioning David's sister Claire more frequently. Claire was 29, recently divorced, and currently unemployed. She'd moved back in with Patricia after her marriage fell apart, and according to Patricia, she was having a really hard time getting back on her feet. "Poor Claire just can't seem to catch a break," Patricia would say during her weekly phone calls with David. The job market is so tough right now, and she's been so depressed since the divorce. I worry about her constantly. I felt genuinely sorry for Claire. Divorce is never easy, and being unemployed on top of that must have been incredibly stressful. I even suggested to David that we invite her over for dinner sometime, thinking it might cheer her up to spend time in our happy new home. Looking back now, I realize that first month of pure happiness was just the calm before the storm. Patricia was already formulating her plans, and Claire was already being positioned as the victim who deserved our sympathy and eventually our help. But at the time, I was just a newlywed in love with her new house, completely naive about what was coming. It started with the drop by visits. Patricia had always been the type to call before coming over, but suddenly she was showing up at our door unannounced. "I was just in the neighborhood," she'd say, though we lived 20 minutes from her house, and there was really nothing in our neighborhood that would bring her our way. At first I thought it was sweet that she wanted to spend more time with us. Maybe she was finally warming up to our house choice. But these visits always came with a side of criticism that she delivered with such a helpful tone that it took me a while to recognize it for what it was. "Jessica, honey, you might want to consider getting some better cleaning products for these hardwood floors," she'd say, running her finger along the baseboard. "Claire always uses this special wood cleaner that makes everything just gleam." Or she'd be in the kitchen while I was cooking dinner and comment, "Oh, that's an interesting way to organize your spice rack. Claire has hers alphabetized, which makes cooking so much more efficient." Every single comment came back to Claire. Claire would never leave dishes in the sink overnight. Claire had such natural homemaking instincts. Claire could make a dollar stretch further than anyone Patricia knew. It was like Claire had become the gold standard against which all my efforts were being measured, and I was consistently falling short. David's reaction to my growing discomfort was what really started to worry me. Instead of recognizing that his mother's constant comparisons were hurtful, he began defending her and dismissing my concerns. "Mom's just trying to be helpful," he'd say when I'd mention how Patricia's comments made me feel. "She raised 2 kids and ran a household for 30 years. Maybe you're being a little too sensitive about this." That word sensitive started coming up more and more. I was being too sensitive about Patricia rearranging my kitchen while I was at work. I was being too sensitive about her critical comments regarding my housekeeping. I was being too sensitive when I pointed out that she'd never once complimented anything I did. The kitchen incident was particularly infuriating. I came home from a long day of teaching to find that Patricia had completely reorganized my cabinets and drawers. When I called David to ask if he knew anything about it, he said his mother had mentioned wanting to help me get more organized. "She was just trying to be nice, Jess," he said. "She spent 3 hours doing that. The least you could do is say thank you." But she'd moved everything. My coffee mugs were now in the cabinet above the stove instead of next to the coffee maker. My cooking utensils were in a drawer across the kitchen from where I actually cooked. It was like she'd deliberately made everything less convenient for me. When I gently confronted Patricia about it, she acted completely innocent. "Oh, sweetie, I thought I was helping. Claire always says how much she appreciates when I organize things for her. I just assumed you'd feel the same way." There was that comparison to Claire again, delivered with such a sweet smile that I felt like a terrible person for being upset about it. Claire herself started making more frequent appearances during this period. She'd show up looking perfectly put together despite being unemployed and supposedly struggling financially. She had a way of seeming helpless and vulnerable that brought out everyone's protective instincts, everyone except mine. Maybe it was because I'd grown up with a sister who actually was struggling, working 2 jobs to make ends meet and still managing to maintain her independence. Claire's version of struggling seemed to involve a lot of shopping trips and spa days funded by Patricia, along with a complete inability to do anything productive about her situation. "I've been looking for work everywhere," she'd sigh dramatically while examining her perfectly manicured nails. "But the job market is just so impossible right now. I don't know what I'm going to do." Then she'd turn to David with these big pleading eyes and ask if she could borrow money for her car payment or her phone bill or whatever crisis was currently preventing her from taking any actual steps toward independence. My friends started commenting on how stressed I looked. I was losing weight without trying because Patricia's constant criticism was affecting my appetite. My best friend Sarah pulled me aside after a girls' night out and asked if everything was okay at home. "You seem really on edge lately," she said. "And you've lost weight. Are you and David fighting?" I tried to explain about Patricia and Claire, but it sounded so petty when I said it out loud. How do you tell someone that your mother-in-law is slowly driving you crazy with her helpful suggestions and constant comparisons to her perfect daughter? How do you explain that your husband thinks you're being too sensitive when you feel like you're being systematically torn down in your own home? The financial manipulation started around this time too. Patricia began suggesting that since David and I were doing so well with our new house, maybe we could help Claire get back on her feet. Nothing major, just maybe let her stay in our spare room for a few weeks while she looked for work. "It would mean so much to our family," Patricia said to David during one of her private conversations that I wasn't supposed to overhear but did anyway. "Claire just needs a stable environment to get her confidence back. And you two have that beautiful spare room just sitting empty." When David brought up the idea to me later, he presented it as his own thoughtful suggestion. I was thinking maybe we could help Claire out by letting her stay here temporarily, just until she finds a job and gets back on her feet. I wanted to be the kind of person who could say yes to that request. I wanted to be generous and family-oriented and supportive. But something in my gut was screaming that this was a terrible idea, that once Claire moved in, getting her to leave would be nearly impossible. I should have trusted that gut instinct because Claire's temporary stay became permanent almost immediately. What was supposed to be a few weeks turned into a few months, and her personal belongings seemed to multiply daily. First, it was just a suitcase and a few hanging clothes in our spare room. Then it was boxes of books and decorative items. Then somehow her furniture started showing up. "Claire really needs her own dresser," Patricia explained when a moving truck pulled up with a massive bedroom set. "She can't live out of a suitcase forever, and this will help her feel more settled while she's looking for work." The job search that Patricia kept referencing was invisible to me. Claire would sleep until 10 or 11 every morning, spend an hour getting ready, and then declare that she was going to spend the day job hunting. But her version of job hunting seemed to involve a lot of lunch dates with friends and shopping trips to cheer herself up after the disappointment of not finding anything suitable. Meanwhile, Patricia's daily visits intensified. She was no longer just dropping by occasionally. She was coming over every single day to check on Claire. At least that's what she claimed she was doing. In reality, she was monitoring every aspect of how I ran my household and finding new ways to suggest improvements. "Jessica, honey, I noticed you're still buying the expensive brand of laundry detergent," she'd say, while folding Claire's clothes that she'd taken the liberty of washing. "Claire and I have found that the generic brand works just as well and saves so much money. When you're supporting 3 people instead of 2, every dollar counts." 3 people. As if Claire was our dependent instead of a grown woman who should have been contributing to the household expenses. Patricia had also begun systematically undermining every house rule I tried to establish. If I asked Claire to clean up after herself in the kitchen, Patricia would jump in and do it for her while making comments about how hard Claire was working on her job search and how she shouldn't have to worry about household chores on top of everything else. If I suggested that Claire contribute something toward groceries since she was eating our food every day, Patricia would look at me like I'd suggested something truly heartless. "Claire is family," she'd say in this wounded tone. "Family doesn't charge family for basic necessities." But the most devastating change was in David. The man I'd married, who used to defend me and support me and make me feel like we were a team, had completely transformed. Every disagreement I had with Claire or Patricia became evidence of my unreasonable expectations. Every boundary I tried to set was proof that I didn't understand the importance of family. "My mother and sister think you're being really cold to them," David would tell me after Patricia and Claire had spent the evening whispering together in the living room while I cleaned up dinner dishes alone. They're trying so hard to make this work, and you're acting like there's some kind of burden. The gaslighting was subtle but constant. When I pointed out that Claire hadn't contributed a single dollar to household expenses in 3 months, David would remind me that she was going through a hard time and that we were fortunate enough to be able to help. When I mentioned that Patricia's daily visits were making me feel uncomfortable in my own home, he'd suggest that maybe I needed to examine why I was so threatened by his mother's helpfulness. Normal wives appreciate when their mother-in-law cares enough to be involved, he'd say. Maybe the problem isn't with them. Maybe the problem is with your attitude. I started to doubt my own perceptions. Was I being unreasonably possessive of my space? Was I failing at being a good family member, the confident, independent woman who'd bought this house and furnished it and made it into a home, was slowly disappearing, replaced by someone who second-guessed every reaction and wondered if she was the problem? The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in July. I'd had a particularly difficult day at work dealing with parents who were upset about their child's summer reading assignment, and I came home looking forward to a quiet evening. Instead, I found Claire in my bedroom going through the filing cabinet where David and I kept our important documents. "What are you doing?" I asked, too shocked to be polite about it. Claire looked up with this innocent expression, holding our mortgage paperwork in her hands. "Oh, hi, Jessica. Patricia asked me to help organize your financial documents. She said you guys had been talking about getting everything in better order." We absolutely had not been talking about that. I would never have agreed to let anyone go through our private financial information, especially not Claire, who had proven she couldn't manage her own finances. "Patricia asked you to do this," I repeated, trying to process what I was seeing. "Uh-huh," Claire said, not even looking embarrassed about being caught snooping through our personal papers. She thought it would be helpful if someone with banking experience took a look at everything. Make sure you're getting the best rates and that everything is organized properly. Banking experience. Claire had worked as a teller at a credit union for 2 years before she got married. That hardly qualified her as a financial expert, and it certainly didn't give her the right to rifle through our private documents. When I told David about it that evening, his reaction was the final straw in what had been months of choosing his family over our marriage. "Mom was just trying to help us out," he said dismissively. "She knows a lot about mortgages and investments. Maybe instead of getting defensive, you should appreciate that she cares enough to make sure we're making smart financial decisions." "David." "She went through our private papers without asking us," I said, trying to make him understand how violated I felt. "How is that okay?" "You're making this into a bigger deal than it is," he replied. "Claire was helping organize things. Mom probably thought we'd appreciate the gesture. Why do you always assume the worst about my family?" That's when it hit me. This wasn't random. The daily visits, the systematic criticism, the undermining of my authority in my own home, Claire's permanent residency, and now going through our private financial information. This was a coordinated campaign to push me out of my own house and my own marriage. Patricia wasn't just being a difficult mother-in-law. She was actively working to destroy my relationship with David and position Claire as the more deserving recipient of our home and our resources. And David, whether he realized it or not, was helping her do it. The confrontation that changed everything happened on a Saturday morning in August. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard Patricia's car pull into the driveway. She usually knocked, but this time she just walked right in like she owned the place, carrying a manila folder and wearing the kind of determined expression that meant trouble. Claire appeared from upstairs almost immediately, like she'd been waiting for this moment. David emerged from the shower, still in his robe, and Patricia called us all into the living room like she was convening some kind of family meeting. "I've been doing some research," Patricia announced, setting the folder down on our coffee table with a dramatic flourish. "And I think it's time we had an honest conversation about this living situation." My stomach dropped. I could see legal documents peeking out of the folder, and Patricia had that self-satisfied look she got when she thought she was being particularly clever. "Jessica," she said, turning to look directly at me with cold eyes that had dropped all pretense of warmth, "you can't stay here anymore. This house belongs in our family, and Claire needs it more than you do." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually felt dizzy as I processed what she'd just said. She was telling me I couldn't stay in my own house, the house I'd saved for and sacrificed for and put my name on the mortgage for. "What are you talking about?" I managed to ask, though my voice came out smaller than I intended. Patricia opened the folder with theatrical precision and pulled out printed pages that she'd clearly spent time preparing. "I've been consulting with a lawyer friend of mine, and since David is on the deed as co-owner, he has every right to make decisions about this property. And we've decided that Claire should have this house." "Claire should have our house," I repeated. Sure, I must be misunderstanding something fundamental about what was happening. "Look at the facts, Jessica." Patricia continued in this reasonable tone that made her demands sound logical. "Claire is a single mother going through a difficult time. She needs stability for her future. You're young and healthy and capable of finding another place to live. David will obviously stay here with his sister to help her transition into home ownership." I looked at David, waiting for him to say something, anything to defend our marriage and our home. Instead, he was nodding along like Patricia was making perfect sense. "Mom has a point, Jess," he said, and I felt my heart break a little more. Claire really does need this more than we do, and it's not like we can't find another place. "Another place?" I stood up, anger finally overriding my shock. "David, this is our house. We bought it together. We've spent a year making it our home." But you're being selfish," Claire chimed in, her voice taking on that whiny quality it got when she wasn't getting her way. "I don't have anywhere else to go, and you could live anywhere. Why are you trying to make me homeless?" The manipulation was so blatant it took my breath away. Claire, who'd been living rent-free in our spare room for months, was claiming that I was making her homeless by wanting to stay in my own house. Patricia reached into her folder again and pulled out more documents. "I've done extensive research on property transfer laws," she said proudly. "Since David is co-owner, he can petition the court to force a sale if you won't agree to sign the house over to Claire voluntarily. It would be much easier for everyone if you just cooperated." "You want me to sign my house over to Claire?" I asked, still not quite believing this was really happening. "It's not your house, Jessica," Patricia said firmly. "It's David's house too, and David agrees that Claire should have it. You're outnumbered here." That's when David delivered the final blow. "I've already started packing some of your things," he said, not even able to look me in the eyes. "Maybe you should stay at your sister's place until you come to your senses about this." He'd been packing my belongings. My husband of 4 years had been going through my personal items and putting them in boxes like I was some kind of temporary tenant he was evicting. "You want me to leave?" I asked him directly. "You want me to leave our house so your unemployed sister can have it? I want you to stop being so stubborn and think about what's best for our family," he replied. "Claire is family, Jessica. Sometimes family means making sacrifices." I looked around the living room that I'd painted and decorated and loved at these 3 people who were calmly discussing my removal from my own home like it was a reasonable business transaction. Patricia was actually smiling, clearly pleased with how well her plan was working. Claire was examining her fingernails with fake boredom, like my devastation was just a minor inconvenience. And David, the man I'd married and trusted and built a life with, was treating me like an obstacle to be removed. "Get out," I said quietly. "Excuse me," Patricia asked, her eyebrows raised. "Get out of my house," I repeated louder this time. "Both of you, get out right now." Patricia laughed, actually laughed. "I don't think you understand the situation here, Jessica. You don't have the power to make us leave. David wants us here." She was right. David did want them there, more than he wanted me there. More than he wanted to honor our marriage or our partnership or the life we'd built together. I went upstairs to our bedroom and locked the door. Through the floor, I could hear Patricia's voice, triumphant and excited, already discussing furniture arrangements and talking about how much better Claire would take care of the place. She was measuring my bedroom for Claire's furniture. In my own house, on the day she'd told me I couldn't stay there anymore, Patricia was planning how to redecorate once I was gone. That's when I realized that this wasn't just about the house. This had never been just about the house. This was about power and control and Patricia's need to prove that her children's loyalty to her was stronger than any marriage could ever be. She hadn't just wanted to get rid of me. She'd wanted to destroy me completely, to take away everything I'd worked for and leave me with nothing. But she'd made one crucial mistake in her scheming. She'd assumed I would just accept it. I spent that night at my best friend Sarah's house crying and raging and trying to process what had just happened to my life. Sarah listened patiently while I told her everything, and when I finished, she looked at me with fierce determination. "We're calling a lawyer first thing Monday morning," she said. "What Patricia did today isn't just morally wrong, it's probably illegal. You can't just force someone out of their own house because you think someone else deserves it more." Sunday was torture. I kept expecting David to call and apologize, to tell me he'd come to his senses and that we could work this out. Instead, he sent me a text message asking when I'd be picking up the rest of my belongings. The rest of my belongings. Like I was moving out permanently. Like our marriage was over and he was already dividing up our possessions. Monday morning, Sarah went with me to meet with a lawyer named Robert Chen, who specialized in property disputes. I was terrified that Patricia's research had been accurate, that somehow I really could be forced out of my own house. But Robert Chen's reaction to my story was immediate and reassuring. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, looking up from the notes he'd been taking, "what your mother-in-law described to you isn't how property law works at all. You're listed as the primary borrower on your mortgage, which means you have the stronger legal claim to the property. Your husband can't just decide to give the house to his sister, and he certainly can't force you out." I felt like I could breathe properly for the first time since Saturday. "So I can stay in my house." "You can absolutely stay in your house," he confirmed. "In fact, since your sister-in-law has no legal claim to the property and no rental agreement, you have every right to require her to leave immediately." Over the next few hours, Robert Chen explained exactly what my legal options were. I could file for an injunction requiring Claire to vacate the property. I could change the lock since I was the primary owner. If David wanted to dissolve our joint ownership, he'd have to buy me out at fair market value, not just hand the house over to someone else. Your mother-in-law either consulted with a very bad lawyer or she made up that legal research entirely, Robert Chen told me. Nothing she told you about forcing property transfers is accurate. That afternoon, I drove to my house to collect some more of my belongings. I found Patricia in my kitchen going through my cabinets and making lists of what Claire would need to buy to replace my dishes and cookware. She looked up when I walked in and her face immediately went cold. "I thought you'd be gone by now," she said. "David said you were staying at your friend's place." "I am staying at Sarah's," I replied calmly. "But this is still my house and I'm allowed to be here whenever I want." Patricia set down her notepad and crossed her arms. "Jessica, I think you're misunderstanding the situation here. David has made his choice, and his choice is his family. You need to accept that and move on." "Actually, Patricia, I think you're the one who's misunderstood the situation," I said, pulling out the legal documents Robert Chen had prepared for me. "I've spoken with a lawyer and it turns out your legal research was completely wrong. I'm the primary owner of this house and Claire has no rights to it whatsoever." I handed her the official notice requiring Claire to vacate the property within 30 days. Patricia's face went white as she read it. "You can't do this," she whispered. "I absolutely can do this," I replied. "And if Claire doesn't vacate voluntarily, the sheriff will remove her. That's how eviction works." Patricia's calm, manipulative facade cracked completely. "You're destroying this family," she screamed. "David will never forgive you for this. You're choosing a house over your marriage." "I'm not choosing a house over my marriage," I said quietly. "David already made that choice when he decided his unemployed sister deserved our home more than his wife did." That evening, David called me for the first time since Saturday. He was panicked and angry and desperate in a way I'd never heard him before. "Jess, please, you have to drop this legal stuff," he begged. "Can't we work something out?" Maybe Claire could pay rent or something? Claire has had 6 months to pay rent, David, I replied. She's had 6 months to get a job and contribute something to the household. Instead, she's been playing house with my belongings and making plans to take over my home permanently. She's my sister, he said, like that explained everything. And I'm your wife, I replied. Or I was your wife. I'm not sure what I am anymore. The conversation ended with him hanging up on me when I refused to withdraw the eviction notice. An hour later, he called back to tell me he wanted a divorce. If you're going to choose money and property over family, he said, then I guess I never really knew who you were. The irony was staggering. David was accusing me of choosing money and property over family while he was literally trying to give away our house to accommodate his mother's demands. But I was done trying to make him see reason. I was done being the villain in their narrative. Okay, I said simply. I'll file for divorce tomorrow. The silence on the other end of the phone told me he hadn't expected me to agree so easily. He'd probably thought I'd beg him not to leave me, that I'd cave in to his demands rather than lose him. Instead, I hung up and called Robert Chen to let him know I'd need divorce papers in addition to the eviction notice. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal activity and emotional revelation. Claire, faced with an official eviction notice and the very real possibility of sheriff's deputies removing her belongings, finally started taking the situation seriously. She'd probably assumed, like her mother and brother, that I'd eventually back down rather than follow through on my threats. She was wrong. The first victory came when the court ruled in my favor regarding the eviction. Claire had 30 days to remove herself and all her belongings from my property, and any failure to comply would result in law enforcement intervention. Patricia's reaction to this news was spectacular and public. She showed up at my house on a Tuesday afternoon screaming at me from the front yard about how I was destroying her family and ruining Claire's life. Several neighbors came out to see what the commotion was about, which only made Patricia more hysterical. She's stealing our family home, Patricia shrieked to anyone who would listen. She's throwing a single mother out on the street. What Patricia didn't realize was that our neighbors had been watching her daily visits and Claire's extended stay with growing concern. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door actually approached me later that evening to offer her support. I hope you don't mind me saying so, she said quietly, but that woman has been treating your house like she owns it for months. My husband and I have been wondering when you were going to put a stop to it. It turned out that Patricia's manipulation hadn't been as subtle as she'd thought. Multiple neighbors had witnessed her rearranging my outdoor furniture, directing landscaping work without my knowledge, and generally behaving like she was the lady of the house. They'd been uncomfortable watching it happen, but hadn't known how to intervene. The real bombshell came when I had security cameras installed throughout the house. I'd originally planned to do it just to document Claire's removal of her belongings, but the cameras captured something much more interesting. Claire, who'd been claiming poverty and inability to find work for 6 months, was caught on camera stealing jewelry from my bedroom. Not just any jewelry, but pieces that had belonged to my grandmother, items with significant sentimental and monetary value. When the police arrived to arrest her for theft, Claire's helpless victim act finally crumbled completely. Faced with video evidence and the very real possibility of jail time, she admitted that she'd been selling my belongings for months to fund her shopping trips and spa days. I didn't think you'd miss a few things, she sobbed to the officers. Patricia said you had so much stuff you'd never notice, Patricia said. Even in her confession, Claire was implicating her mother in the systematic theft from my home. The investigation that followed revealed the true scope of their scheme. Patricia had been encouraging Claire to take my belongings from the very beginning, justifying it by claiming that since Claire would eventually own the house anyway, she might as well start enjoying the benefits. David's reaction to his sister's arrest was the final confirmation that I'd made the right choice in leaving him. Instead of being horrified that Claire had been stealing from me, he was angry that I'd pressed charges. She's going through a hard time, he told me during one of our last conversations. Did you really have to involve the police? Couldn't you have just talked to her about it? Talked to her about stealing my dead grandmother's jewelry. like it was some kind of misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a friendly chat. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly straightforward once all the criminal activity came to light. David's lawyer advised him to accept my terms rather than risk having his family's theft and fraud exposed in a public trial. I kept the house, obviously, since I was the primary owner and the victim of their scheme. David got his personal belongings and his car and nothing else. But the real justice came from watching Patricia's carefully constructed manipulation campaign collapse entirely. Once the neighbors learned about the theft and the attempted property takeover, Patricia found herself socially isolated in a way she'd never experienced. The extended family members who'd always admired her strong personality suddenly saw her behavior in a very different light. David's uncle Mark actually called me to apologize for not realizing what was happening sooner. Patricia always was controlling, he admitted, but I never thought she'd go this far. What she did to you was criminal, and I'm ashamed that she's part of our family. Even some of David's cousins reached out to express their support for me and their disgust with Patricia's behavior. It turned out that Patricia had been using similar manipulation tactics on other family members for years, but no one had ever stood up to her before. Watching her lose the respect and admiration she'd spent decades cultivating was more satisfying than any legal victory could have been. Meanwhile, my own life began to transform in ways I hadn't expected. Without the constant stress of Patricia's criticism and manipulation, I started sleeping better and eating regularly again. My work performance improved dramatically, and I even got offered a promotion to department head that I'd been passed over for the previous year. "You seem like yourself again," Sarah told me one evening as we sat on my reclaimed front porch, enjoying a glass of wine and watching the sunset. "I'd forgotten how confident and funny you used to be before all this started." She was right. I had forgotten who I was before I'd started second-guessing every decision and walking on eggshells in my own home. The woman who'd had the courage to buy this house and make it beautiful was still there. She'd just been buried under months of gaslighting and manipulation. 6 months after Patricia's ultimatum, my life looked completely different. The house that had been the center of so much conflict had become a peaceful sanctuary again. I'd redecorated Claire's former room as a home office complete with built-in bookshelves and a comfortable reading chair. The master bedroom got new paint and furniture, erasing any lingering traces of my failed marriage. But the most important changes weren't physical. They were emotional and psychological. The experience of standing up to Patricia and David had taught me things about myself that I'd never realized. I learned that I was stronger than I'd thought that I could endure, having the people closest to me turn against me and still survive. I learned that being called selfish for protecting what was mine didn't actually make me selfish. Most importantly, I learned to trust my instincts again. All those months when I'd felt like something was wrong, when Patricia's helpful suggestions had made my skin crawl and Claire's helplessness had seemed manufactured, I'd been right. My gut had been trying to warn me, but I'd been too concerned with being a good wife and family member to listen. The healing process wasn't immediate or easy. I spent several months in therapy working through the trauma of being systematically manipulated and gaslit by people I'd trusted. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that what had happened to me was a form of psychological abuse, that Patricia's campaign to undermine my confidence and authority had been deliberate and calculated. "Manipulative people often target their victim's sense of reality," she explained during one of our sessions. "They make you question your own perceptions so that you'll defer to their version of events. Your mother-in-law was very skilled at making her unreasonable demands seem logical." Understanding the psychology behind what had happened helped me stop blaming myself for not seeing it sooner. I'd been a normal person dealing with someone who had years of experience in manipulation and control. The fact that it had taken me months to fully recognize what was happening didn't make me weak or naive. It made me human. My career flourished once I was free from the constant stress of my home situation. The promotion to department head came with increased responsibilities and a significant salary increase. I found myself genuinely enjoying work again, rediscovering my passion for literature and teaching that had been buried under all the domestic drama. My personal relationships improved dramatically as well. Without David's family constantly criticizing my choices and undermining my confidence, I became more social and outgoing. I started hosting dinner parties again, joined a book club, and even began dating someone new. James was everything. David hadn't been respectful of my independence, supportive of my career, and completely uninterested in having his family members move into our respective homes. When I told him about what had happened with Patricia and Claire, his reaction was immediate outrage on my behalf. "They tried to steal your house," he asked incredulously, "and your husband went along with it. What kind of person does that to someone they claim to love?" It was refreshing to have someone validate my experience instead of suggesting I was being too sensitive or unreasonable. As for Patricia and Claire, their lives took decidedly different trajectories after their scheme collapsed. Claire, faced with actual legal consequences for her theft, finally got a job working at a retail store. The steady employment and the reality of having to support herself seemed to cure her helplessness remarkably quickly. Patricia's social isolation deepened over time. Her manipulation tactics, once exposed, lost their effectiveness entirely. Even David began keeping his distance from his mother once he realized how thoroughly she'd destroyed his marriage for her own purposes. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Patricia had tried to reconcile with me several times, sending messages through various family members about how sorry she was and how she'd only been trying to help her daughter. But her apologies always came with justifications and excuses proving that she still didn't understand the fundamental wrongness of what she'd done. I never responded to any of those messages. Patricia had had months to treat me with basic human decency, and she'd chosen manipulation and cruelty instead. I wasn't interested in giving her another opportunity to demonstrate her lack of genuine remorse. The house itself became a symbol of my resilience and independence. Every room held memories of the battles I'd fought to keep it, and every improvement I made was a celebration of my victory. I planted the garden I'd always dreamed of in the backyard, filling it with vegetables and flowers that bloomed more beautifully each year. Sometimes when I was sitting on the front porch in the evening, I'd think about how different things might have been if I'd given in to Patricia's demands. If I'd signed over the house and accepted my role as the disposable daughter-in-law, where would I be now? Probably in some cramped apartment, still married to a man who'd proven he valued his mother's approval more than our partnership. Instead, I was exactly where I belonged in my own home, surrounded by things I'd chosen and earned and fought to keep. The experience had been traumatic, but it had also been transformative. I'd learned that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. I'd learned that family loyalty shouldn't require you to sacrifice your dignity or your security. Most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones who'll hurt you the most, and that recognizing that truth isn't cynicism, it's wisdom. The story could have ended differently. I could have been the woman who gave up her home to keep the peace, who prioritized other people's comfort over her own rights. But I chose to be the woman who fought back, who refused to be bullied out of what was rightfully hers. And every single day, I'm grateful for that choice. So if you've ever been in a situation where someone tried to make you feel guilty for protecting what's yours, or where family members demanded sacrifices that only seemed to go one way, I want you to know that you're not wrong to resist. You're not selfish for having boundaries. You're not unreasonable for expecting to be treated with basic respect in your own home. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to refuse to be treated badly, even when that refusal costs you relationships you thought you valued. Sometimes standing up for yourself means standing alone, at least temporarily. But here's what I learned: standing alone in your own home, surrounded by your own things, living according to your own values, feels infinitely better than being surrounded by people who don't actually respect or care about you. The loneliness of being abandoned by people who claim to love you is temporary. The regret of abandoning yourself for people who don't deserve it lasts forever. I chose to keep my house, my dignity, and my self-respect. It was the best decision I ever made. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because I'd love to hear your stories and perspectives. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life experiences about family dynamics, relationships, and learning to advocate for yourself. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that it's okay to put your own well-being first sometimes. Thank you so much for listening to my story and for all your support. I hope that whatever challenges you're facing in your own family relationships, you remember that you deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Until next time, take care of yourselves and remember that your home should be your sanctuary, not your battlefield.